Have you ever wondered why people are drawn to numbers? Why do certain patterns appear over and over? Are the recurring ratios inherent in the universe proof of an intelligent design? To educate me on this today is our guest, Richard Heath. He has authored several books on sacred geometry, including Sacred Geometry, Language of the Angels, and his latest book, Sacred Geometry in Ancient Goddess Cultures. There's a lot to learn on this one, so let's hear from Richard. This topic of sacred geometry that you have several books on, it seems to be in many places these days, but how did you first discover such a desire to want to explore this subject?
Well, we have to go back, I think, 30 years to the 1990s when my brother discovered a geometrical fact about the moon and the sun. And he excitedly came up to Edinburgh, which I lived there at that time. And he said, "Oh, this is wonderful. It will do everything. And of course, it's taken a long time, even in the 1990s, to consolidate all of this interesting information about sacred numbers, as it was in those days. So when I started to see that not just the sun and the moon were governed apparently by number and geometry, but the eclipses and then Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and so on. This led to my first book in the early noughties, as we call it. And in that book, I found some data that made enough of a book to show that numbers had played a part, but this part was only seen from the surface of the Earth. So, as anyone might realize, we live on the third planet, which is going around the sun, and all these other planets are going around the sun as well. But it turns out that the moon and the planets have a special numerical relationship that we only are privy to. So that gave me the go-ahead. We published it in England, and then Inner Traditions wanted to publish it after their reader had said that it was interestingly original. So since then, the books went through a progress of looking into more and more of these relationships, but keying them into big themes, such as what was the origin of civilization and all the numbers that we have in all the things we do with numbers, and how it could be placed in history as being something the ancient world was informed about, but we've lost that information. Now, when we go back into the ancient world, we find really that we have to go further back to the megalithic period, where there is evidence of astronomy taking place, in which there is, the monuments are capturing events to show the sun and the moon, and that from that you can tell that they had this view that we only get from this planet, when the modern astronomer has a view sort of translated into various frameworks, such as the ecliptic, which is the sun's path around the sun, or the horizon, what the right ascension and declination. So part of my book is really about trying to reintroduce. My books try to reintroduce the what was apparently discovered in the megalithic period, got fed through the ever-changing world of the ancient Near East, that's Mesopotamia and Egypt, and then came into the Greek world and influenced us through the Arabic world and so forth. And this lost tradition, I think, is important for us to know about, because not only have we lost knowledge of it, but we have lost the idea of what the purpose is of us being on Earth and of the universe, and the dynamic drama going on, really. Instead of which, we're overrun by our own chatter in the modern world, and all the pressures that are on our cultures. So is that's sort of I think how I got involved with it, up to the first few books.
It really is an interesting subject, and the way that you position it opens up our thinking that maybe the reason why things are aligned the way they are not at random. So when you look at these structures, the way that they were built, these megalithic structures in correlation to astronomy, to you, does that give evidence of divinity in the universe?
No, and that may sound shocking in a way. Of course, a lot of people have worshipped the sun in the past, and have worshipped the moon, and worshipped the planets, indeed. But they've also worshipped trees. Basically, people had an explanation for the world that had to be directly visible. We have an explanation of the world now which is quite invisible, that there are all these forces and things at work. So when we look towards the sun at the solstice, as we might do yesterday or today, that's a very important source of information when counted using days. So in the ancient world, they didn't have clocks. They didn't have glass lenses, or they might have, but they weren't accurate things. So they didn't have brass granulations and everything else, and calculators. So what in the ancient world they had to rely on was counting the number of days in a year, or more basically, the number of days in the lunar month. So in the lunar month, it's about 29.5 days. And if you count 2 months, then you get an even number of days. And the longer you count, you get more and more accurate results as to what it is. But the point here is that by counting days, the Stone Age, long before the megalithic, were already making tallies in bones. And these tallies appear to be counting the moon in the double cycle. And in some cases, they seem to be playing around with the properties of number in general, such as the prime numbers that go into other numbers, dividing into them. And we soon discover, if we do that kind of a hobby of interest, not quite full mathematics, we do discover that numbers are all equally apart by one from the last one and one to the next one, but they accrete new values as they count, so that 9 has 2 3s in it, and a 3 will divide into it, a 6 will divide into it in some sort of a way, but leaving some third left over. So they developed a science of fractions, realizing that they could reproportion things, for instance, to look at a particular length in a different way by using a different measure. And so these are a few of the kinds of techniques that they appear to have made it possible for them to then ultimately compare a length with another length to form, say, a right triangle, where the end of the 2 pieces of rope or something like that end one above the other, only they're laid flat. So at that point, you get a right angle at the corner. And this opens up what we call today trigonometry. But for them, it was not all about sine and cosine. It was a direct phenomenon, where you could compare any angle or any triangle with that angle in it and develop that it was a relationship between this number and that number. In other words, a fraction. And this approach allowed certain numbers to pop out as being sacred. You know, we know that there are 12 months in a solar year, but that's solar months. And the lunar months are a little bit shorter. That's 30.4 compared with 29.5. So a little bit shorter. And it turns out that you can do various things to discover all about the long-term time relationships between the moon, the sun, the eclipsing of the moon and the sun, and the counting of all these things is often seen in these larger monuments. So that not only today have we seen the sun at its maximum northerly, if you're in this hemisphere, northerly position, it would go to the equinox, obviously on the two equinoxes, and it would go to the southerly winter position and then come back again. So turning your two horizons to east and west into an amazing calendar of sorts. But the 12, the difference between the two causes the sun year to be divided by the moon to produce a fraction over 12. And that fraction actually is very close to 7 over 19, which means that in 19 years, there'll be 7 full lunar months more than there are in the 228 of 19 lunar years. And so by this method, they were able to not have our calculators, not have any data books, but to, over centuries and millennia, develop and probably intercommunicate between different centers of the megalithic, what they were working on and how they had developed these geometries which expressed the numbers in the sky as if someone had made it that way.
It really is interesting how it all came back down to just they're paying attention to the night sky and counting, and that these ratios kept coming back. Now, in your book, Language of the Angels, you talk about the universal will. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, the universe that we live in today is defined by a very large universe seen by telescope and other instruments. And at the end of that seeing, we've more or less come to the idea that it must have been a big bang. So we have to, to a certain degree, and this is true with all these things, we have to unpick why we think something and how our culture came to think that way, and then remove that kind of influence to try to see, well, how is it possible that they could have known or thought something? And so in this case, in the universal will is an idea that philosophers have had, that beings arise in the universe. You know, you can't really have a being outside the universe. It has to exist. And beings are functional. You know, they do things, and the stars and everything are all functional, and the atoms. But the one unique characteristic is will. And it's only really when you have these three-brained beings who can think on top of having a sense of self and have a functional body. It's only when evolution gets to that point, you can see that will could only be if the universe was created, it would have to be a work of will. So the idea there is that the universal will is the will that we see making the universe, from which derive these ideas like angels or planetary intelligences, or which if they exist, they would be fulfilling the universe for a purpose, and so it will has purpose, and so the universal will is to create the universe. But there is another aspect to the creation, which is the creation of man is obviously part of a process of transforming the universe. In other words, not just laying it out, but creating something new through human beings. So that in the systems that the words, the lingo that I use, is, I would call it the cosmic individuality, which is a form of divinity that's realized by human beings, where they have they become independent of the universe. So that in this view, actually, so it's a bit of a jump from what we were talking about before.
Right.
And so I put it at the end of the book and so on. But I think I would like to say that it does explain, in a way, a lot of the religious terms and the philosophical terms and other things, and it gives man a role, human beings, should I say, human beings a role that is obviously theirs by the nature of their capacities and possibilities. And now, I don't want to sound too much like a prophet and a messenger or some sort of thing like that, but it's got we must realize we need to revalue our relationship in the world in order not to proceed to destroy our world, because we have such obligations to have been born this way for a start and to have these lives. But on top of that, we are destroying our own possibilities. So that's a different, probably, subject than I expected to talk about here.
The reason why I wanted you to touch on this, because it's a very, philosophical concept, and it really does add a layer to what seems to be very simple early man thinking, where they would just look into the cosmos and count and use that to develop and apply that into their structures, and that's how things really developed. But
I know.
It looks like instructions, right?
It looks like instructions. Is that what you're saying? It's
yes.
That well, I think that they were very close to phenomena in the past, and we are not very close to phenomena, really, in terms of understanding it directly. So I just think that was true then. But the other part of myself seeks to use what they knew to develop my own personal, or to bring in cosmological ideas that are possible to me. So I don't like to completely rule myself out and have myself as a pure transparency for the megalithic or the ancient world. What I'd like to do is bring out the wonder of it, because I've been able to decode a lot of stuff. And so that makes it more and more credible and likely that it's true that they did all these things, or that all this was possible, and that we've lost it. But for instance, if I could explain Jupiter as a relationship to the moon, all of the outer planets in particular have a strong relationship with the moon that was created out of the Earth. Some say by the collision of two planetoids, the Earth and another. So when that happened, one imagines that a lot of spin was added to the Earth, a lot of different products from the other body got spread in the crust, particularly metals. Sometimes it's called the wedding ring of the Earth, the metals that are in the crust, because normally they would be down in the core. So, and very fortunate too for us that they were there. So there are many things about the moon, but it has these very strong and primal resonances of a full whole tone of 9/8. Jupiter has that, and Saturn has a semitone of 16/15, which in the ancient world is a form of tuning we call just intonation. So there seems to be some musicality involved in the structure of the planetary system. And to go beyond into what could not be seen, probably, Uranus has another ratio of 25/24, the chromatic semitone. And beyond that, Neptune has a relationship of 28/27, which is not harmonic. But you can see that you can go beyond probably what was possible in the past once you understand how their system worked, because we already have the data for the synodic periods of Uranus and Neptune, and all we have to do is divide them by the lunar year, and we obtain these numbers.
And you do talk about how the great thing about this math here is that it doesn't deteriorate. We can go back and see what their knowledge was by following the math.
Well, the planetary system, first of all, is effectively immortal because it's friction-free. They're quite separated from disturbing each other a great deal. And they tend to go on there so that anything happening in the sky in the megalithic period or even in the Ice Age is likely to be almost identical today. So we're living in a sense the same world that this astronomy was conducted in, and so we're able with our new facilities to live on both sides of the ancient and the modern.
And now, is this what you mean when you say this knowledge is Atlantean?
Well, I use that word, of course.
Yeah.
There's an infinite number of books on Atlantis and an endless number of places where it possibly was. But the point about it is, I think Atlantis was the kind of myth that belongs to this kind of understanding. And that's why many fragments of the past are found in buildings that belong to fairly recent periods.
So are you really referring to, unlocking the knowledge of that was lost, or proof of knowledge, advanced knowledge that was lost through looking at a lot of this information you propose?
Yes, I think so. And we don't know which bits of it because the original sources were lost, except for some things like the megaliths or but by using these techniques, including metrology, which is the calculational system, we can see their intellectual life, which you can't do by digging or by chemical analysis and other things. So I think that one of the greatest uses of this, and I wish that it was taken up by archaeologists, but it would take quite a time for them to learn how to work with the system. But it would be well worthwhile if we could achieve credibility for the people doing these sort of things. And I think that they don't really want to open that door, and so therefore it has to be done independently. But I do think that this is like like what is presented in Atlantis, but that's a very small story, really.
Right, but the overall theme, there is knowledge that can be not necessarily this place of Atlantis, but just the idea of advanced knowledge or more understanding that we can try to regain,
Yeah.
unlock that knowledge that they did have.
Yes.
So you also talk about how a lot of these numbers and symbolism ends up being translated into myths and stories.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the if we remember, the people had oral traditions. So initially, when you get the data in the megalithic period, they, like the Aboriginals did or do in Australia, they would have pictures up on caves of their knowledge or understanding, and somebody singing a song, or people initiates who would be able to point things out to people. So I think that there was a period when the oral tradition was still functioning in Greece, for instance, but it then got written down as that tradition faded away. And so we're gifted with all these stories in myth and legend. And then in the Bible was being written in its early books in Babylon under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar. It was Abyssinian. So they had adopted the alphabet, just like the Greeks. And that was a recent thing. That only really happened in the first millennium BC, and there you get a complete transformation of what you can do with words. For instance, the Bible is full of very interesting coded stories where numbers can be equated with letters, so that names can be numerical numbers added, when you add them together or multiply them, or you almost do anything with them. It became a way of encoding the numerical information alongside a story in which the characters and the setting were communicating what was the meaning of, say, a god. So, I think that's how that happened, and these stories were written down in this alphabet, and then we receive them. So it's a second layer. Some were written down in cuneiform in the ancient Near East as well, like Gilgamesh, you may have heard of. So all these stories give us a taste of the intellectual life of the people, but the number system behind it is an intellectual system that goes beyond, into prehistory.
And you have also mentioned about how humans have a natural proclivity to certain symmetry and geometry.
Well, I mean, for instance, we know the symmetry of faces. We know the symmetry of objects that have a central axis, and are the same on both sides. I mean, geometry is a natural feature of our optical sensors, the processing
Right.
and things. So, we're heavily involved, and we've got special organs for all sorts of things, including the performance of language. So we seem to be like rather, where did that all come from? And so, the more you look into these things and question them, the history and story of language is an enormous subject, but it's obviously more profound in some ways because there's no written evidence before. But so therefore, I'm faced with trying to put together quite a lot of the textual mythical information alongside these astronomical results and site analyses to make a case for it being a coherent tradition that's been rendered subconscious for modern human beings.
What do you think that will do for the world?
Well, I think that, like I said, they respect when I think the problem with the modern thinking is that because we have the selfish gene and we have many ideas of reductionist science at work, and then we have the idea of the free market, and it really isn't free, but and so on. And so what we've got is a lot of built on the idea that the universe is an accident. People have written, one guy anyway wrote a book called The Accidental Universe, and this is how we try to explain how these wonderfully fortunate accidental things, in every stage of development of the universe, such as cosmic constants conspiring to make stars, and for the rates of things to be just perfect, down to evolution itself. Recently, people have started to question whether the natural evolution is a process governed by natural causes, or whether it shows signs of some purposive nature, maybe in the molecule or other things. And then that opens the doors to the idea that that the world is not an accident, and if it's not an accident, then we can't arbitrarily destroy it. We can't neglect it. We can't. In other words, it gives us what religion used to perhaps give us, but it will give it in a way more of wonder from the actual information. And so people will be better for that.
And then wouldn't that also though be proof of a divine purpose in the universe? If it was, if we can see through here that there was a structure behind it through what you propose, doesn't that now say that, well, there must be some sort of God out there that created this?
Yes. For a long time, I've been associated my thinking with Gurdjieff. And in the picture he paints in Beelzebub's Tales, it is of a God who knows that their place of existence, whatever that is, maybe that's what the universe is, will run down inevitably if there aren't sources of renewal within it. And so Gurdjieff describes a redesign of his way of working, where there would be some way of beating entropy. So he really goes for the throat by saying that the problem with existence is entropy. You're going to die. What your body does for you is it makes, and all life, it makes a local area where it is not subject to death for quite a long time. But ultimately, it takes energy from outside to make that possible. And this is what nature provides us with. This is the gift of nature, food. And, the food obviously is helped along. It wouldn't exist without the sun. But then you got chlorophyll and the food chain, and then you got the animals, which are in danger of extinction. And what you've got to see is that we're on the growing tip of the evolutionary purpose of the earth. That's what one has got to see that. And this makes it, in Gurdjieff's thinking, he in a time of great distress, he realized that he had, just as he had been thrown into this world, without knowledge, like we all are in a way, and then conditioned by our society, that he he had to make some sort of a work in himself in which he could escape entropy as well. Not in order to be free in the sense of immortal particularly, but in order to be free in the sense of feeling freedom, because the world is not full of freedom, and it one needs to work on oneself, he said. So this is something that made a big impression on me, and I think if there is a God, he made a very good job of presenting what that might be like.
It's kind of amazing to think about. Let me ask you this too. I want to find this out because I know when you talk about these megalithic monuments, you said a lot of them have, an astronomical basis to them, or a numerical significance. Which of the megalithic monuments, if somebody wanted to study and really be put in awe of a lot of this work, would you say they should definitely look into?
Well, I came. There were, but I mean, when it comes to studying the monuments, it's books. My books are an imitation of the preceding books. So, if you know anything about my books, you know that that's the kind of thing where you don't. Although people do visit monuments, of course, and that's helpful. I've probably only thoroughly visited and measured one monument, and that was in Karnak, and it was Limanio, and it's a quadrilateral, so it's got four sides, and it's long and thin, and it opens out as you go along, and it effectively has the triangles of the moon. The base has a curve of straight lines, a straight line of stones, 36 of them. And if you measure along that from a specific, very distinct sun gate, as it's called, you get the 1,063 days in 3 years. And then if you go off on the next face and form the triangle, you find an exact carved straight edge. And the distance there to the sun gate is 1095.75 or something. So these two give you 3 years. And this is, one of the most significant figures in sacred geometry, in my opinion, and it's one of the most significant monuments that exists. I mean, we all know about Stonehenge and the pyramids, but this is a modest document. People walk through it, not, hardly. There's no, you can't. People cycle through it or anything, it's just, and there are parts of we've found parts of the monument, my brother and I, we found parts that were obviously part of the actual monument, but they're actually in the walkway, and they just look like a bit of protruding stone. So that is an amazing monument, and the whole area of Karnak is very exciting. The whole area around Stonehenge and Avebury is incredibly exciting. And these are well studied so that you can always read up about them before you go and get a lot of more insight into the monuments. And I believe the stones in Gavrinis, when they'd finished all this business in Brittany and in Karnak, they made a fantastic, on Gavrinis Island, fantastic great cairn with a corridor and a chamber at the end. And towards the second half of it, it turns into completely decorated, stone-packed, concentric, wavy lines with various straight lines and other things in them. And I've interpreted these, as others probably have, to be, in fact, in my case, that they're actually things like inches that they use to count. And so having this way of to have such monuments in this place, it's 4 miles away to the east, Gavrinis, but it was sealed up around 3000, and all of the stones in there appear to have different weathering on them, and so they appear to have been transported from all the existing sites. So they were like your information boards that you might get, and they were all lined up and made that and sealed off, and no one got into that chamber until the 20th century, I think.
And the correlations between sun, moon, and earth, you say, is in there as well. It
Yeah,
really is.
yeah, all the monuments you'll find they have some sort of relationship. The Karnak alignments are very famous, and all I've really been able to do with the first one is to, I believe, reveal that they were looking at the 18.618 years cycle with the stones, showing by how delayed or advanced the rising of the moon was, they knew where the node was, the moon's nodes. And it's the nodes that create the eclipses, by the way. So when the sun stands and the moon stands on nodes, you get either a lunar or a solar eclipse. And so, and I got a lovely illustration of that actually, which I made. So, and I think that's in the probably in the book called Lords of Time book. So what's happened with me is a cumulative set of books, partly because I find a new theme by which to tell some of the same stuff again, but to say it in this context. And I'm getting closer, so to speak, to a system that I hope will be more cosmological in the sense of saying to us, well, surely this shows that this planetary system is probably a kind of design that may belong in various places, because as Gurdjieff says, he makes these assertions, although he's telling a story that he says is just a myth to his son, but it's about the reality of the universe to his grandson. And so he says that that the planet where he arose also had a large moon like ours, and that all the other planets without these large moons, they have a completely different regime. And so if we are to find life like ours, it would be on a planet with a large moon, probably in resonance with giant planets and other things. And so when we are looking at this, we're looking at what may be a template. We live in a planetary system in which the Goldilocks region has a lot of these numerical relationships in addition that somehow allow there to be life on Earth.
Really mind-blowing when you kind of think about it. And this
Yeah.
ratio even goes down can correspond into human bodies as well.
Yes.
And heartbeats.
Yeah. That we are probably have these aspects. And Pythagoras thought this, and perhaps coined the term microcosm. And so you can see that there was a secret religious interest at that time in using this as a path of transformation, that the knowledge was, humans were becoming individualized around the time of the archaic Greeks. They were escaping from the god kings and some of the other aspects of the previous ages. So here we are, they are inventing a sort of like a path of transformation, perhaps, but there are no direct records of it.
You say you call it the microcosm, and then of course the macrocosm, the universe.
The macrocosm, yes, the greater, and they're too reflective of each other.
It's like they say, as above, so below. One correlates to the next.
Or God created man in his image and likeness. Man, male and female created he, him.
Right. Before we wrap up over here, I want to make sure that we draw attention to your new book. You had one just came out. It's Sacred Geometry of the Ancient Goddess Cultures, right?
Yeah.
And is there we want everyone to go out there, grab this book. And what's the overall message in that book?
Well, all right, that'll be another half hour. Yeah. Well, I came to the conclusion that the Neolithic hadn't arrived in the areas of the megalithic culture, and so labeling their monuments as Neolithic implies that there were farmers, because the Neolithic revolution is absolutely about farming. It's about speaking Indo-European and various other things. If you read the documents about Göbekli Tepe, that's what they're now calling, the scientists are calling it the Neolithic package. And it traveled through the Hungarian plain rather than Mediterranean and reached Paris around 5000 BC. But it takes ages for the farming to adjust the land to suit it. And many lands are not that suitable. And so you get a mixture of cultures taking place. And what's the mixture with but the old world matriarchal societies, or matrilineal, where you don't know your father particularly, but you're known by your mother's name and by the tribal name, probably. And you every man is your uncle. It's sort of like often older man is your uncle. So they form the core. The women form the core of these tribes naturally because they had to bring up the children. They birthed the children, male and female children. They're all born by them, and then therefore, I believe that this is the group that could have had the capacity, because they sowed not, neither did they reap, as Jesus said, which is an interesting comment. But they didn't have to worry about the seasonal year, and they had to have a territory. That was the important thing. But then they had the manpower, and the manpower was all working together already. And so one initiating factor in this book was that it could well be that the goddess culture is responsible for the megalithic rather than Neolithic patriarchal culture.
Richard, thank you so much for spending time with me. Really appreciate you sharing this knowledge. It really is kind of
I very much. Yeah, I enjoyed it, Michael.